Is the new Persona 3 Portable port the new definitive way to play Persona 3? I think, depending on what you're looking for, it might just be. Because for the longest time, I've lamented the state of Persona 3 for newcomers. Persona 3 was the revolutionary entry in the Persona series that allowed it to catch on here in the West all those years ago. So, naturally, fans of Persona 4 and 5 wanted to see what this one was all about. I think this port might be the one I would recommend for most players, the same way I might recommend Neptunia, Sisters vs. Sisters. Today's episode has been brought to you by Idea Factory and their latest NepTep title, Neptunia, Sisters vs. Sisters. Take control of the goddess candidates guided by Nepgear as they rise from a slumber so long to a game ministry gone oh so wrong by a menace known as the trendy phenomenon. As you roam the lands of game industry, you'll face fierce foes, and it's time to fight. Use combos and chain your attacks in real time with a unique battle system that's also tactical and bright. Deck out your party members with Plan Neptune style, and when you're done, show off your flair with photo mode while you smile. With the trendy phenomenon's destruction so grand, the R-Phone is now the citizen's communication command. So connect to the Chirper social network and help those in need and earn special rewards and plant the seeds of hope indeed. Match up your team members with a partner for stat increases, elemental bonuses, and make the bond stronger, and get even better bonuses and numbers. And fans will be thrilled to discover 2 new characters from legendary game developers, Higurashi from Ryushio 7 and Shanghai Alice from Zune. Pre-order your standard edition, limited edition, or calendar edition of Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters using the special link in this video's description to get a special exclusive trading card, and it'll support the show by letting them know that Super Dark sent ya. Thank you Idea Factory for sponsoring this segment of today's video. There's the original Persona 3, of course. This version of the game had a polygonal world that players could walk around in, within schools, talk to NPCs, go to the outdoor mall, etc. But that was pretty quickly overshadowed by the enhanced re-release called Persona 3 FES, which I reviewed in full years ago. FES had everything from the original game, but included some extra social links and events and an optional campaign that I personally didn't love. But others have said that they did. That release was on PlayStation 2, but a bit later, Atlus brought Persona 3 to the small screen, which cut the polygonal world out of the game in exchange for a point-and-click style interface, but in exchange added a new way to play, as a young woman protagonist with a different social link path of her own. So when Persona's 25th anniversary rolled around, many of us in the fandom had really high hopes and expectations that this might be the answer to our insatiable appetites. Take Persona 3 FES, then Persona 3 Portable, put them in a blender, and keep the best of both worlds. How did that go? Well, as you could probably tell from the title of this video, we got a whole lot of Persona 3 Portable, but not a whole lot of Persona 3 FES. How disappointed should you feel about this? I'm glad you asked, let me tell you. Not very disappointed. A little bit maybe, but I mean, not enough to really ruin your day. And honestly, depending on what you personally were hoping for, this could be absolutely what you've been waiting for, because the new Persona 3 Portable is a very competent port that increases the resolution of the gameplay from something you used to play on a screen half the size of your phone to something that looks pretty decent when blown up onto a big screen OLED TV. And listen to this, we're all much older than we used to be. And that inevitable forward march of time means that my hands just don't have the patience to put up with tiny controls anymore. But with the new ports, your hand cramps are only as severe as you want them to be, because you can just, use a full-size controller if you want to. This might seem like a small improvement, but it's one that you'll most definitely be thankful for if you've spent 100 hours with the PSP's thumbstick disc thing. It was great for its time, but today? No thanks. So already this is an improvement over Persona 3 Portable, but what about FES? The content of Persona 3 Portable is exactly what it was before, which is to say, actually very good. Persona 3 Portable's gameplay was also a huge step forward from Persona 3 FES, because it resolved what I thought was the game's biggest flaw: the inability to issue commands to your supporting team members, which when paired with the game over screen that you see every time Yukari refuses to act like the healer she is meant to be, results in the main character dying. And despite having characters that have access to revival skills, even if they would have revived your protagonist on the next turn, it's game over. Obviously, this was wildly frustrating experience on Persona 3 FES, and it persisted in the game's optional second campaign, The Answer. But like I said, they fixed this in Persona 3 Portable, which means that's one of the headaches that newcomers won't have to deal with. So in the grand scheme here, what are we actually missing that's holding this game back from being the true definitive version of the game? There's that optional post-game content that I've said before I wasn't really a huge fan of. Without going into spoiler territory, the big problem is that it takes place after the events of Persona 3, but it completely disregarded all of the character development. all of the character growth of all of your teammates since the beginning of Persona 3, which is a huge problem. Here's the short version of why. Half of Persona 3 is all about increasing your social links with your team and other characters, helping them through immense personal struggles, helping them become better versions of themselves. But because the answer doesn't import a save file from the journey, the game has to work like it assumes that you didn't help anyone out at all. Imagine spending something like 3 months of your life helping out your friends getting jobs, kickstarting careers, and then you check on them a week later and they're all living homeless on the street like nothing you did even mattered in the end. That's the vibe I get from Persona 3's The Answer. So, all of that is to say, missing out on the optional post-game content is really no big loss, unless you were only in it for the dungeon side of the gameplay to begin with, because that's all The Answer even was anyway. A series of unforgiving dungeons and a story that isn't even canon. The other thing that we're missing from making this a definitive version of the game is the 3D environments. And which 3D environments are we missing out on? Believe it or not, there's really not that much. There's the school that you could walk around in, and a mall, and a few outdoor hallways. Nice to haves, to be sure, but if I'm being really honest with myself, how big of a difference would this really make, really? Probably not much in and of itself. However, there is also some collateral damage from the loss of these polygonal environments, which are, I think, a much bigger deal than exploring the world itself. And that is the fact that without the polygonal stage, we have new pre-rendered backgrounds to look at, but these weren't really upscaled and often look a bit smudgy against the blocky low polygon character models. A lot of in-engine cutscenes were also cut, meaning that we were left with some cardboard cutout character portraits, making Persona 3 Portable feel even more like a visual novel than its predecessors. The real question for me, though, is why is it that Atlus didn't attempt to insert the original anime-style animated cutscenes from the PlayStation 2 versions? Some scenes were just laughably underwhelming in comparison, such as the introduction to Tartarus. Audiophiles will be dismayed to hear that the port retains the low bitrate voiceovers. The files must have been ripped straight from the PSP. I'm guessing Atlus didn't have the original recordings to work with, which is a real tragedy, because even to my untrained ears, I can hear that crackly compression, especially on sibilant S's when spoken out loud.
Maybe this is the best Penthesilea can do in terms of data gathering. Although, the power of Persona seems to be much broader than I thought.
A lot of us welcomed these compromises if it meant we could play Persona 3 on the go. It was just fine for me at first, but looking back at the PlayStation 2 version of the game, it can be a pretty tough sale. Taking all of this into consideration, is the new port of Persona 3 Portable the definitive way to play? In a word, no, it's probably not, but I think that it's got us about 90% of the way there. A not-so-small part of me does wish that there was a way to experience the best of both worlds without having to make compromises. Widescreen support, both protagonist routes to choose from, like in Persona 3 Portable, but also have a fully polygonal world to explore in an optional post-game campaign like in Persona 3 FES. But I don't think we should let the shadow of what could have been take away from the thunder of what we did get, which is a far more accessible way to play. And by playing on a Switch or a Steam Deck or even remote play, the game can now live on as the portable experience it was always intended to be, or comfortably seated on a couch the way I always wanted to enjoy it. And this time, the hand cramps are optional.